Welcome to the Manitoba Ag Days podcast, featuring speakers from our 2017 event. This podcast features Angela Fox, the owner-operator of Steadfast Ranch, and her talk is called Because I Love.
So we operate a 200 head cow-calf operation. The total ranch is about 11,000 acres. When Jay passed away, we had about 400 head, but we decided that was maybe a bit much for me, so we trimmed back to 200.
Our farm's called Red Crest Farms, and we argued about that a lot. Well, we named it Red Crest because our debt load was cresting, so I could kind of match that.
Our dream would be for the ranch to be an 800 head cow-calf operation. That's always been our goal, was to build.
We have 25,000 broilers, which we raise to 2.3 kilograms, 5.2 times a year. And it was our base business, and then we also grow some corn, wheat, soybeans.
And I think we were so lucky because we had done a farm business analysis actually like maybe the month before Jay passed away. And on his, as part of that, it was a list of your goals and what you wanted to see in 5 years, 10 years. And our long-term goal was to run a cow-calf operation that was 800 head and to eventually have an arbitrage. It was December the 23rd, and we actually, Jay and Devin had, for Christmas, I had bought them tickets to go skiing with my dad.
On December the 16th, 2013, I was picking up my daughter from school, and we stopped and had a little lunch and came home.
An ordinary day, I went to town, did some shopping.
Driven that road, I don't know how, thousands and thousands of times.
We were getting ready to pack up, and I had a gift for Jay's brother, Lyle and Rose, and I was standing at the table wrapping it, and he said, I'm gonna run to town and get chicken.
And my son Nate, who was 18, was working with my husband spreading potash, and he called me and said, Mom, you gotta come to Aunt Doreen's farm, one of our farms.
He said, then we don't have to worry about supper tonight, so we can get all this stuff done. So I said, well, okay, that would be great.
And I'm like, what's wrong? I could tell instantly something was wrong. And he said, just get here as soon as you can. So I think I broke every speed limit under the sun.
When he left, I thought he went for chicken. So when he left, though, he looked over his shoulder and he said, Ange, I want you to know you're a talented woman. And then he left.
And got there, and he came out and told me that Brian was dead.
So I'm standing here wrapping it, and next thing I know, Devin is at the door, and he said, Mom, come quick. Dad's caught in the loader.
So he had called 911, and so the police were there already. I still don't like police cars.
So I went running out to in fact, I didn't even put shoes on. I went out there, and he was caught, and I knew we needed help fast.
And we just waited, and they wouldn't let us see him all day long because there's an investigation, and it was all taped off, so it didn't seem real.
When we were in Dauphin, they made it like everything pointed to the fact that there was a possibility that he could still be okay. Mm-hmm. But I think we all knew.
The day Brian died, I got up. That night, I went and did chores.
Yeah.
I went out and I went and did the chicken chores. I by myself. I cried the whole time. I said I created salted chickens that cried.
Yeah.
Because I cried every time I went in the bar. I cried, but it was having something to control when everything else seemed out of control. For me. And I knew what I was doing, and I was confident in that, and I could just go and do it.
My friend Sue, I meant to say this earlier, but my friend Sue, I can remember maybe 5 days after this happened, and Sue said to me, Maggie, you're smart and you're stubborn. You're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm stubborn. At least I've got that going for me right now. And there's a lot of just, I'm going to bear down and do this.
Yes.
And it's going to happen.
Yeah. And with that comes happiness, I think.
There is. And there's some satisfaction to it 6 months later.
Yeah. And being happy makes me feel like it's a great legacy to Jay.
Yes.
Because he would just would not want us to be victims of this.
Oh.
Like he would want no part of our unhappiness.
No, that does not define us.
Yes.
That moment does not define us.
No.
And my husband could light up a room with his smile.
Yeah.
Like literally beamed. And I cannot think of him without him smiling.
When happiness is no longer guilt.
Yeah.
Because I know for a long time after Jay passed away, I would have happy days and I would cry myself to sleep at night because I felt happy that day.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah. It was like, how could I possibly be happy amidst these circumstances? But there comes a time when you're like, no, we need to be happy.
Yeah.
It's for our families, for our communities.
And for ourselves.
And for ourselves.
We're young. We need to. We need to feel joy in life.
Yes. And I think that is one message that everybody should take from our less than perfect circumstance, is that make sure that whatever you do, you've done it well enough to give yourself a choice. Yes. Because I would not have wanted to have to move. Where if someday that's a choice that I want to make, at least it was my choice. And I think husbands out there, they want that for their wives. Like my husband wanted me to be able to have a choice whether I wanted to stay here or not.
I'm not done the journey yet. And when we built the barn, there were great big boulders that came out of the foundation when you're digging. And I can still remember, I said I want to put one right beside the front of the house and put a flag, Canadian flag up. And so Brian brought the rock around on the front loader, and it weighed a lot, and I'm standing there in front of it thinking that I'm going to stop this boulder from rolling down the hill when I'm in front of it. And it just plunked down perfectly in that spot. And I think that was where we were meant to be.
I think often decisions that we make financially, or a lack of organization, defines what we do from this point forward. And I think one of the greatest gifts that Jay gave me was to be able to choose.
Yes, me too, and time.
Yeah.
Gave me time to get my ducks in order emotionally.
Yeah.
And my kids some time too, because they're young and they're not sure what they're going to do in the future, and they shouldn't be forced into farming just because their dad died.
Yeah.
You should be able to choose that.
I think we're much more aware of our own mortality. When Jay's accident happened, I was a firm believer that when it's your time, it's your time. And yeah, it was a farm accident, but he could have rolled the truck on his way to Chicken Chef that day. And I think that the only way to prevent dying is to not be born.
No, I've still got.
Morning, everybody. So a little background on the video is that when Maggie and I did that, we were approached by BDO Canada to do a speaking tour with them. I know Jim personally through some work that I've done with him through the Outstanding Young Farmers. So the video that you see is the first time that Maggie and I have ever met. And they flew out and they spent some time on the ranch with me that day, and that is us having our first conversation together. So obviously they edited it where they needed to, and they did what they could. And Maggie can't be with us today. Maggie is the editor of Country Guide, and she had some obligations at home, so this is actually the first time I've ever done it by myself, so I'm hoping it'll all go good. So when Maggie and I first started with the presentation, we told Jim that our only real goal was to make it through the presentation without doing the ugly cry. So if you know what the ugly cry is, it's like not when beautiful tears are streaming down your face. It's like all of a sudden there's snot and tears and like that. And that was our goal. We weren't going to get up here and do this. We were going to try and get through it. And we've been pretty successful so far. So when you lose someone that you love, you get lots of advice from other people. But there's a huge difference between being the executor of Aunt Edna's estate and planning your life after you lose somebody that you love. And family farm businesses are complicated. When you lose someone, you're not only losing a main operator, but you're losing a member of a family. And life goes on that next morning, whether you want it to or not. And so we developed the Because I Love You list. And it's a list of things that people should have in order should something happen on their farm. When we originally started talking about it, we said, well, what are we going to name this tour? And I kind of was like, well, it's kind of like get your crap in order. And Jim was like, yeah, I don't know if that's the right. So we settled on Because I Love You list, because I think it is an absolute gift to anybody that would be left behind, that they wouldn't be searching for all the answers to the questions. So I believe that they've passed the list out, and you can refer to it as we go along if you'd like. So on a farm, when you lose somebody, everybody's grieving. And that makes it difficult because in my own situation, it took all the strength that I had to be able to get up in the morning and carry on with my life. I had 4 children. I have 4 children. Devin at the time was 14, Charlie was 5, Porter was 4, and Major was 2. And that will always sting in my heart because they were so little. And I think that I had all that I could handle inside our home, keeping the kids safe and stable. And but then I also, at the time, we had 400 head of cows. We had, the feedlot pens were full with what we were keeping over till spring. We had all the cull cows were in a pen at the time, and it seemed like every single time I went out, there was frozen waterers. The thing about it is life goes on that very next day no matter what. So I would encourage, on your list there, I would encourage you to think about someone who, if something happened to one of the main operators on your farm, who would take over? Who would be able, that very next morning, who would be able to step in for you and take over? And I don't think that it should be a family member, and I don't think that it should be a close family friend. It should be somebody that knows your operation well enough that they could come in and help for a short period of time. But we have to remember that when you lose someone in a small community, everybody loses someone in that small community. So I think it's really something that people should think about and how they would be able to operate the next morning. I think that it's a responsible thing to have a plan, but I also think that it's a gift. When it came to, oddly enough, when it came to like the details of the funeral and stuff like that, Jay and I had talked about it, and I think it's now I realize that that was maybe strange, but at the time I thought that's kind of what married people talk about. But I realize now that no, like it's not a household conversation in most people's homes. But earlier that spring we'd had a town hall meeting in Eddystone, and Jay had come home from the meeting and he had said, oh, they're selling plots at the Willow Grove Cemetery. We should buy plots. And I was like, we're 30. I am not buying a plot at the Willow Grove Cemetery. And that was kind of the end of that discussion. And then later in the spring, all of a sudden we go to town to get the mail, and we're driving down the Willow Grove Cemetery Road, next thing I know. So I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll make him happy and entertain this. So he showed me which plot he wanted at the Willow Grove Cemetery. And for us, that was a big weight off my shoulders, because we had moved from Alberta out. And I think that actually that could have been a very, very hard situation in our family, because there was family members who wanted him to be buried in Lloydminster, and there was family members who wanted him to be buried in Eddystone. And because he had told me, he had told his mom, and so we knew it was easy, and then there was no fight, there was no argument. I think that's an important thing to talk about. I also, strangely enough, knew what songs Jay would like. I knew who he wanted to have as pallbearers. I also knew that there wouldn't be a hearse for Jay, that we have this old beat-up farm truck. It's like an 89 Chev. And actually, it's one of these pictures up here. And we call her 412. She was just a mere unit 412. And I knew that that's what would take him to his final resting spot. I knew that my son Devin, who was 14 at the time, would drive him, and the kids and I would ride with him. But what I didn't know is how special that would be and how much relief it would give me. It was like a gift, like a farewell gift to him, that he could have a service that I knew that he would have loved to have been at. And I remember we were driving down, Devin and the kids and I were driving in, and I looked back, and Jay's friend Kelly was riding behind us with the horses were riding behind us, and he was riding with his daughter Josie, and they were holding hands behind us. And I told the kids, I said, make sure you look back, and I said, remember this forever, because it's so special. And I'd never imagined that that would come out of our situation. And I don't think that when people think about dying, they realize that that is truly a gift to your family. What I also didn't realize until that day is how extremely loved we were. I think you don't know that until you've been in the situation and your community pulls together. Everybody surrounds you with their love and friendship. And it's unfortunate that we have to learn that in those moments of our life. But honestly, until that day, I didn't know. And my kids' school, they go to a little school, and the parents at the school, they brought us supper every Wednesday for the rest of the year. Every single Wednesday, they came with food for us and took care of us. And I just think that what a great place that we lived in, that people were so happy to help us. And I don't think you ever realize that until you're in that situation. So I would encourage you when you leave here to go home and talk to your families. And if you can, write it down. Like, some people have a hard time with that step, but at least if you've talked about it, people will know what you want. And I think that the thing that you need to realize is that pre-planning gives us time and choices. And there's a certain amount of time after that you need to be able to just kind of drift. And by being pre-planned, you can just cope with day to day rather than having to cope with all the big stuff in the 2 weeks post somebody's accident or death. So, I'm going to get you to stand up. If everyone can stand up, we're going to do a little bit of a survey here, put you guys to the test. So, if you don't have a will, sit down. And promise me you'll do that when you go home. Because that is the biggest step right there, is if you have a will. So if you haven't reviewed that will in the last 5 years, sit down. The lawyer will tell you that you should review your will every 5 years and make sure that it's up to date. I think my mom and dad did theirs, and I still have guardians, and that's how often they review theirs. So if you've changed your business structure, so if you've went from being a sole proprietor to a partnership or incorporated and you haven't changed your will, sit down. If you don't know where your will is without looking at your wife, sit down. If you've bought or sold any major assets such as land, machinery, and you haven't changed your will, sit down. If you've had a change in your personal life, like you've got married, divorced, had a new baby, and you haven't reviewed your will, then you need to sit down. Oh, we got a few keeners. So if you're still standing, I think you guys should give them a round of applause. That's great that you've got all that done. And now everyone can sit. So not very long ago, my grandma passed away. It's probably in the last couple of years. In with her will, she had a nice little note that said, she'd said where she wanted all of her stuff to go. And at the end of the note, she said, but above all else, I want you guys to all get along. And I think that that's really important. As a parent, when something happens to us, we want our family to stay intact. We want our kids to still get along. We want life to go on as best as it can without us. And so, by having proper documentation and distributing that documentation, you alleviate a lot of family fighting. So if you've got a will and your kids kind of have an idea of how the will reads, especially older children, obviously, and there's no big surprises in there for them, you've had the time to discuss it and work things out, then I think that alleviates a lot of trouble that could cause your family to split up after your passing. Good planning also gives us time and choices. And I think Maggie and I have been pretty straight about that in the video, that by giving yourself time, I think you give yourself the opportunity to make better choices. When we're grieving, it's not necessarily the optimal time to be making big life decisions. Often you'll hear people say you shouldn't do anything drastic for a year. I would say probably not for 2 or 3 years, because I think that first year is just surviving. So I would say you got 2 or 3 years before you should start to do anything extremely drastic. But if you don't have everything wrote up properly, you're not going to be giving people that opportunity, because they're going to be short on time to get everything done. I think another thing that we overlook sometimes is in family farming operations, we have children that are staying in the operation, and we have children that might not be. And there needs to be proper documentation on how you wish to deal with non-farming children and farming children. And Jim taught me something, and we're doing this in my own family. And one thing that Jim taught us in our travels doing our tour is fair is not always equal. So if you have a son that has put in years and years and years on the farm, then that's worth something, right? Often we try to divide things up so everything's equal, but we need to just keep in the back of our minds that that's not always fair. When we have kids that have put a huge investment into an operation versus someone who maybe, say for example, I have a brother that's put tons of time into the operation, and I have a brother who works in the oil field. So he went out and made a living. This guy stayed at home, helped dad. So there's got to be some sort of a balance in there so that we make sure that we get it right, so that it is fair for everybody. After Jay passed away, I think one thing that I realized is I struggled with where my relationships were going to go. Some of you in here will know Lyle and Virginia. That's my mother and father-in-law. And I'm so very blessed that it is, because they helped me through a lot of tough times. And, but like afterwards, I think they didn't know when to help, and I wasn't sure when to ask for help from them. And so it took us some time to kind of get that sorted out. So we went to a 3-a-day. This is what we call it, our 3-a-day. So they phoned me morning, noon, and night. And I know some of you are probably like, I do not want my mother-in-law calling me 3 times a day. But I do. Like, she's just the sweetest lady. And you know what? In the morning, I know that they're okay. They know that I'm okay. Then if they touch base sometime in the afternoon, they know. And at night, they know that we've made it in. If we're at hockey and something happens to us on the road, I know that someone's going to be checking to make sure, well, geez, it's funny, Angie, and the kids aren't home. It's 10 o'clock. Someone will come looking for me because I know that they will check in. And I think that that's what we've established. It works for us. Everybody seems quite happy with it. It wouldn't maybe work for every family, but it does for us. And I think that there's a time where you have to sort all that out. You got to give each other, extend grace to other people. And I think that's so important, because everybody's heart is sore. So be sure that you've done things in a way that you can allow grace to be extended. So in our business part of our life, Jay and I were pretty prepared in some ways, and in other ways we had some unfinished stuff. And like I said, Jay was 32 and I was 33, so it wasn't like we thought that we had no sense of urgency in it, but we had done some of it. During those first months after Jay passed away, everything seemed, like all the little things, they seemed so big. Like going to town to do a little job was like every ounce of strength I had. And sometimes I'd make a list and I'd be like, okay, today I've got to go to the accountants, the lawyers, and then at the end of the list, I'd give myself a treat. So maybe I'd stop for a pedicure on the way home. And sometimes I wouldn't get through that list. I'd get in about 2 little check marks off of it, and I was like, that's it. I'm out of here. Like, I can't do any more of this. And every little thing that you get done helps to make things better, but it takes time. The other thing is, I wasn't really sure who to trust. And I'm not really sure that I trusted myself either. I was making big decisions that were going to impact our life for the rest of our life. And I was trying to do it by myself. I'd never done that before. I'd always had Jay. Every decision we made together. And so I was continually second-guessing myself. And I do think that when you plan things, you talk about them, it helps to take that burden off of someone. So one thing that happened with us was we had our bank accounts set up so that we both signed the checks. And I say the reason that we had this way was because every time I had a baby, he bought a new truck. So that's what worked for us. We both signed on our bank accounts. And then, like, all the major purchases in our life we talked about, because Jay could be like a little irrational and go to town and decide we were getting a new tractor today or things like this, right? So this helped a happy marriage. Happy wife, happy life. It was kind of like that. But it wasn't so handy when he passed away, because at that point, the partnership that we had changed to a sole proprietorship, and all the money that was in there was seized until we could get through. We had just sold calves, so basically all the bills were paid. There might have been a few stragglers out there, but basically everything was paid. So that was good, but all the money was in there for the years operating as well. And so the bank did end up letting me take some money out of the account and so that I could keep going until we got it kind of all sorted out. But I do think that I learned something through that. And I think that everybody should have a personal bank account. Everybody should have a personal Visa. Absolutely everybody. It really doesn't cost you a whole lot to have either if you use them wisely. And in the event that something happens, they still have access to be able to get money. Another thing I learned through it all is if you do have checks come in, after that, do not deposit them into bank accounts. Take your checks to your lawyers so that they can hold them in trust, and then you can access funds. Because if you put them into the bank account, they seize as well. So, and I didn't know that. Honestly, I was probably like 3/4 of the way through the process when the lawyer is like, why do you keep putting money in those accounts? But I didn't really know what else to do, right? So if that's your situation, take your money to your lawyer and let them deal with it, as opposed to putting it in a bank account. Like I said, you can only handle so much at a time, and it takes an extended length of time. I would say, you know what, I still have stuff I haven't got changed over. I still get from Revenue Canada things that say Angie and Major Fox. And there'll always kind of be little drifters that you think, okay, I'm done now. But then that's there, and you need a death certificate. So then you have to go back to the funeral director, and that goes on for a long, long time. I said, one thing that I learned is I believe I cried at the doctors, the lawyers, the hairdressers. Everywhere I went, I got really good at crying. But I also remember the day that I decided that had to end. And that was maybe a month later. I think that we need to realize that you cannot overestimate your family's ability to be able to function after somebody passes away. Another thing that I had a little bit of trouble with was when the bank came. We had a will, everything was going along good, and then the bank said, well, you might have to probate. I'm like, oh, like everything that I know about this says probating costs you a lot of money, and I didn't want to do that. So I sit down at the bank and I say to them, like, okay, what are we going to have to do so that we don't have to probate? Why do we have to probate? We have a will. And she said, well, you know, in as nice as way as you could tell someone this, she said, well, it would be just in case he had a girlfriend. And I'm like, pardon? Like, hello? And so anyway, I go home. That was a real mess of a day. I go home, I phone AJ, that's Jay's sister, she's a lawyer, tell her what she said, and I learned a couple things. Don't ever mess with a grieving lawyer. Because she had that straightened out in no time. We signed all the proper documentation, and we were free sailing from there on out. But if you don't have people in your corner to do stuff like that, people can take advantage of you. So you have to know your professionals. All those people on that paper, make sure that you know them, and that you know them well enough that they're going to be in your corner if you need them. I believe that if you have children, debt, a family farm, if you're breathing, you should have either some sort of a life insurance policy or some sort of a nest egg. Because I don't think that people realize how much it costs to die. It costs a lot of money to die. And people that don't have that put that burden on, they don't have those funds set away, they don't have a policy, they don't have a nest egg, that becomes a burden for their family. And so I think that that's something that everybody, I see young people in here, and start now, start putting away money. It doesn't have to be marked like funeral fund or anything like that, but put it away so that if something happens, there's something there to be able to at least take care of some of the costs. I also think that if something had happened to me rather than Jay would have needed money. He for sure would have had to get childcare. He for sure would have needed a housekeeper, someone to do the books. There would have been a long list of things that he would have had to pay for that would not have been budgeted for either. So I think very important is don't underestimate the women's value on the ranching or the farming operation either. Make sure that you take care from both sides so that there's funds available. So when a family is grieving, it's not a really great time to find out that there's unfinished business. So I'll give you an example. I think about my brothers. The boys worked in the oil field. I had children, they didn't. And so often when they would get a job and they would fill out their paperwork for insurance and such, they would put me down as a beneficiary. Or they'd put Devin down as a beneficiary. And years go by, and they forget that they worked at Precision Drilling and had that policy. And nothing gets changed. It stays the same way. So in that moment, you're setting up a situation that could be dangerous to your family. So if you have life insurance policies, make sure you know who the beneficiary is. Because when people are grieving is not the greatest time to rely on the fact that they'll do the right thing. You have to remember that everybody is grasping and holding on to what they have left. And you don't want other people to have to be making decisions that are going to affect your life. So make sure that you know where your policies are, who the beneficiaries are, and have them wrote down somewhere so that it's easy and there's no opportunity for a fight to occur from something like that. I think that whatever situation you find yourself in, you have to be able to have a choice. In my situation, I wanted to stay on the farm. And Jay had done this for me. I couldn't imagine of having to pack up the kids and leave our farm because we couldn't have financially stayed there. Or in our situation, so we have Crown lands. We have lots of Crown lands. So the way that the Crown lands agreement is such that you basically have a year's grace post-death to get your everything back in order and be operable. So, like if I was to have sold all the cows that day, I would have had a year basically to drift, and then I'd have to restock and be back up to running capacity. And so that's good. It's worked really well for our family, but it didn't give us the choice of staying at our house and say keeping part of the farm, or just staying there and doing nothing. Like if you had the means to be able to, you could just stay there and do nothing for 5 years and decide what you're going to do from there. But that wasn't the case for us. Because we had our Crown land agreement, we had to make a big choice quickly. And I sat the kids down. I mean, they were little, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 14. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do, guys? Like, we had come from Saskatchewan, so I'm like, do we go back? Like, do we go to where there's family closer? Do we stay where we are, where the kids have their friends, their school, our community? When you move away from a little community, life goes on without you. But the community that we were in, life surrounded around us. So for me, it just seemed like the best place that we could stay was right where we were, and to continue where we were. And you know what? All that was Jay was there. We didn't want to be forced out of there. So that was done very easily because of the proper paperwork that had been done ahead of time. And I hold no judgment. If people decide they don't want to do that, that's fine too. I think brave of you to be able to do it that way too. Those are big, brave choices. And I don't judge anyone, but I know that even if I had decided to leave the farm that day, I would have never been out of there I'd have been lucky to be out of there within 2 years. by the time I got all my paperwork done and everything, it would have been at least 2 years. So Jay died on December the 23rd, and we started lambing on about the 1st of January. And I just remember how much those little lambs helped me. Like, I would go out, and if one died, I would obsessively cry over that lamb. But those tears weren't because of maybe the lamb, but they helped me to get everything that I needed to get out. I think that I've read in grief books that for what you don't grieve now, you will grieve later. So you need to be able to allow yourself the time to be able to grieve. Our business was our home. And we are a complicated situation on our family farms when it comes to that. Our business is our home, it's our life. And I said that chore time was always my time. And I would go out and I would chore, and my neighbor Ed sometimes would come down and he'd say, Angie, do you want me to do chores today? I'd say, no, but just don't be here when I get back. Because I'd go out there and I'd cry and I'd cry and I'd cry. But at first, it was tears for all the unfinished dreams and for the fact that that was all left up to me now. And there was tears about who to trust. And then there turned into tears of joy. I remember I was out fixing something, and I had taken a shop class in high school, and I welded this piece together, and I was like, yes! And I'm sitting there with my little bead, and I was crying because I did it. It stuck. I was so happy. And I went in the house and I Facebooked my shop teacher, Mr. D. I'm like, I did it. It held. And he was like, I knew you could do it. You know, he believed in me. And that was a defining moment in my grieving. I will be forever indebted to my community, to my family, and my friends. But I've worked really hard to be grateful. Tragic death reminds you that you need to live. And I think that in high school, I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Brick, and when he was he did our graduation address, and he said, Angie's easy to describe. She's happy. And that served me well. I want to be happy. I wanted life to be happy for us again. So I decided that my hardships can't define me. I have a lot to be grateful for. I have 4 children. I have a husband that loved me enough to last a lifetime. And I have a lot of great family and friends. That's a lot to be grateful for. In my journal on Sunday, November 17th, 2013, I wrote, I continue to accomplish my goals and carry on because I know that Jay believes in me. I will not let death steal my joy from me. I will live a life that is accomplished, and I will not give up on my passion for agriculture. I love this life. Maggie and I were both very blessed that we had husbands with larger-than-life personalities that were funny and loved us, and that got us through a lot of hard times. And I know that they would be proud of both of the women that they left behind. So in closing, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Be gracious, let other people help you, and help other people. Be brave, go home, fill out your Because I Love You list, make a plan, and above all else, never give up on happiness. I'm good.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you at Manitoba Ag Days 2018 from January 16th to 18th.